a day after he was sworn in as Sri Lanka's new president, Anura Dissanayake has said in an interview that the island nation does not want to be sandwiched, especially between China and India. The statement, remember, comes amid concerns of the Marxist-leaning Dissanayake winning the country's elections as speculation about his soft spot for China becomes stronger. 55-year-old Anura Kumara Dissanayake has become a symbol of political transformation in Sri Lanka. He rose from a humble rural background to claim the country's presidency in what many call a groundbreaking election. He is the first president of Sri Lanka who does not hail from political royalty. Disanayake's election marks a significant political pivot for Sri Lanka, which has so far been ruled by the same few parties and families for decades. Many believe that this has led to a continuing economic recession and deep-rooted mistrust of traditional political leaders. Now, back in the 1990s, during his university days, his political activism drew him to his current party, Janata Vimukti Peramuna, or the JVP, which is basically a left-wing Marxist-Leninist party. JVP has a history of armed uprisings in 1971 and between 1987 and 89. The violent insurrections led by the JVP were fueled by a hardline Marxist ideology aimed at overthrowing the existing political and economic systems, which they viewed as exploitative and feudalistic. That perhaps has worked for them this time around. With Sri Lankans in the midst of a collapsed economy, many struggling to make ends meet, working 2 jobs even, and paying more taxes. President Disanayake's campaign has been centered around a new era of renaissance for Sri Lanka. Will he be able to turn around Sri Lanka's fate? Let's try and understand this from people who live there, from citizens of Sri Lanka themselves. Joining me on the broadcast is Jehan Perera, Executive Director for National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. I'm also joined by Dr. Ranga Jayasuriya, columnist, Daily Mirror and fellow Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. Good evening, namaskar to both of you. Let me start with you, Dr. Jayasuriya, first. This has been a historic elections for more reasons than one for Sri Lanka. There is an economic crisis, there is a political crisis as well. How do you see this victory, first of all, of President Dissanayake? Clearly, people voted for change, but people also perhaps voted out of anger for the previous regimes.
Yeah, in fact, people voted with anger. That is partly why it enabled Mr. Dissanayake to come with such a massive majority, considering that his previous run for election presidency was he obtained only 3%. From 3% to 42%, which is a massive leap from where he started. So definitely it's a major leap from Mr. Dissanayake that was propelled by the anger, popular public anger, which Mr. Disanayake's party, which is NPP, exploited and capitalized on better than any other party. So definitely there was the other factor, as you mentioned, he's an outsider. But he's not actually a complete outsider. If you remember, he was the Minister of Agriculture in 2003, 2002.
Yes. All right, we'll try and fix that network issue with Dr. Jayasuriya, but let me also get in Jehan Perera into this conversation. Mr. Perera, this anger that we're talking about that Sri Lankans had in their minds and they voted against stems out of the kind of political crisis and economic crisis that the country has seen. And with President Dissanayake campaigning around these 2 challenges that Sri Lanka faces, do you think that he will be able to fulfill the kind of promises he's made during campaigning? Transparency, good governance, the corrupt will be punished, there will be renegotiation with the IMF loan that has been taken, who many think is very strict on austerity. Do you think all of these promises will be a big challenge now for President Dissanayake and his government?
First of all, I'd like to make a slight sort of not correction, but give a different point of view about the anger. Actually, there is a rejection. There has been a disgust with the mainstream politics. The mainstream politics that has got so corrupt and so full of lies. And there is a yearning for honest politicians. And so with the Dissanayake, President Dissanayake, there's a lot of hope that a new era will come to Sri Lanka because he comes from outside the mainstream. He has been in politics a long time. His party cadre, they have been dedicated to trying to change Sri Lanka. Now they have got the opportunity. They got the opportunity because of the economic collapse that took place 2 years ago. And and also the fact that even though normalcy has been restored to a certain extent, the living standards of people have dropped a lot. It's very hard for people to make a living. And also the fact that in the last 2 years, the issue of corruption has not gone away. In fact, it may even have got worse. So there's a lot of hope that with Dissanayake here, that things are going to change. But it's going to be difficult because corruption is entrenched in the country at all levels, from the highest to the low. Even when we get into some sort of slow engagement with government officials, sometimes we also might want to pay a small bribe. It's so bad in the country now, but people don't want this to continue. The second issue, of course, is that to improve the economy is going to be difficult. There's no money. We are short. Our expenses are greater than our income, and the IMF is being very strict about it. Now, President Dissanayake said he's going to renegotiate, but he's also made it clear that he's going to keep to the agreement, that the IMF agreement will remain. And maybe on the sidelines of that, there will be some adjustment, but these are both going to be difficult things. Dealing with entrenched corruption, renegotiating with the IMF, both are going to be problematic, especially because he's also going to be facing elections, general elections very soon, because he does not have a majority in the parliament, and which is why the parliament will be dissolved.
Okay, we have Dr. Jayasuriya back with us on the broadcast. Dr. Jayasuriya, we've been talking about the kind of challenges that President Dissanayake faces, the kind of economic crisis that the country has seen. There is, of course, a political crisis as well. But so far as his Marxist leanings are concerned, there have been concerns and speculation about his pro-China stance, something which was talked about earlier, now is being talked about even more, considering that now he's the president of Sri Lanka. What sort of a thought is prevalent in Sri Lanka regarding this? How do you think he's going to take this forward? He's made it clear he doesn't want to be sandwiched between China and India, but how do you think he's going to take this forward now?
I think what is important is, though his party may have a ideological affinity to Chinese Communist Party, the way the China is governed, they have also criticized the Chinese development loans, because one problem with China and Sri Lanka was China was vastly identified with Rajapaksa government. So China was rather extension of Rajapaksa regime. So whereas I think Mr. Dissanayake starts with an open mind. So I don't think he will be rather driven by a very particular personal dependency on China, which was the case with Rajapaksa administration. So I don't think any sort of a major dependency at the moment on China, though both Chinese president and Indian Prime Minister extended best wishes for him. And at the same time, if you see the past, Mr. Dissanayake and the JP and the NPP have largely criticized Chinese development projects. So I don't think they are dependent on China per se, but China will try to rope in these people because they see ideological similarity. And as Chinese did with many countries where the left-leaning government is there in Ethiopia or much of the Africa, they might try it. But it is also important that NPP is also a wide spectrum of people. Some are rather nationalistic, some are xenophobic, some are open-minded, some are liberal-leaning. So it will be an interesting contrast of people. Sure. So we cannot be sure until the general election is held and the outcome of the general election is confirmed, what sort of government would Sri Lanka have in the future? Because Mr. Wickremesinghe Mr. Dissanayake without a parliamentary majority would have very little practical power. So we have to wait till how it plays out in the presidential, in the parliamentary election, which is supposed to be held in December. Most likely, because the parliament is likely to be dissolved midnight,
Mr. Perera,
and the 3 members of the cabinet.
Yeah, so we'll have to wait and watch, of course, Dr. Jayasuriya, how that pans out for him. But Mr. Perera, a word from you on how, India's concerns have been. Of course, like I said, he's seen as a pro-China Sri Lankan president. He has also had a history of being part of and leading anti-India campaigns back in the 1987 to 89 uprising. So there are certain concerns. How long do you think President Dissanayake can be away or can be balanced in his China approach?
Well, I understand maybe Indian concerns that President Dissanayake is close to China because of the past. It is true in the 80s he was more, the JVP that he was part of was a more Sinhala nationalist party, and they felt that India was supporting the Tamil cause, and that the Indo-Lanka Accord of 87 was also kind of favorable to the Tamils, and he opposed that. And there was a certain anti-Indian sentiment, strong anti-Indian sentiment at that time, not just in the JVP, but among the larger population. But I really think that President Dissanayake has transcended that past. Actually, I never think of him as being pro-China. I would rather, I see him as he's pro-Sri Lanka, like Prime Minister Modi is pro-India, India first. I think President Dissanayake is Sri Lanka first. And I don't see any hostility in him towards India. He, like us, appreciate the fact that India bailed us out of that enormous crisis, that at that terrible time, we were waiting for the Indian support, the money to come to enable us to purchase, to get the next shipload of fuel in. So that memory is very strong. And secondly, in the recent past, I mean, he has gone to India. He's been invited by India. He went to India in February, met with your leaders, and he came back and spoke well about the Indian development. He would like to have developed similar development to Sri Lanka. I really don't. And also, we must keep in mind that he's aware, every one of us is aware, that China has a lot of money to give and for infrastructure, that our main markets are not in China. Our main export market is in the US, in the West. So we know that we can't that the West is also concerned about China. So I think because of that, President Dissanayake and any reasonable government will not try to be pro-China in that sense. They won't be anti-China, they won't be anti-US, they won't be anti-India or anti-Europe. They'll be pro-Sri Lanka. That's how I see it.
Okay. In the same breath, can I also ask you, Mr. Perera, then, what about the minorities? Largely, his party has been seen as people who are against the Tamils and the Muslims in the country. How do you see that really panning out for President Dissanayake? They've had a history of being vocal against, a lot of issues that concern the minorities of the country.
Yeah, but as Dr. Ranga pointed out, it's not anymore just the JVP. There is the NPP, a larger formation, and comprising diverse people.
Yes.
What they're all united in is they want a clean Sri Lanka. They want new leadership, and they want to ensure that Sri Lanka develops. Now, with regard to the minorities, again, I see a change in the JVP. The JVP, I think they would not say they were ever anti-minority. They were against devolution of power, for instance, because and that is indeed a bit of a problem. President Dissanayake during this election campaign said he will accept the existing system of devolution of power. He does not think it is the ideal or the best solution, but he will accept it and operationalize it until they come up with a new constitution. But I do think that the JVP's ideology is a uniform one, that it's one Sri Lanka, equal rights for everyone. But in an ethnically and religiously divided society, there is a need for space, for identities. I think that is something that the JVP,
Sure.
that pressure needs to be brought on the JVP and on the new government. And I think that's also a reason why the minorities did not vote for him in large numbers on this occasion.
Okay. It's also interesting that politicians across the world, while campaigning, say different things, and when they assume the chair, implement things very differently. This is across countries. But Dr. Ranga Jayasuriya, let me get an understanding from you then, now that he's been elected as the president, and Sri Lanka needs to recover from the kind of crisis after crisis that it has seen, especially economically. What are the first few steps that he will be mulling to take, he will be planning to take, just to get Sri Lanka back on the recovery path?
I think at the moment, what he can do is very minimum, as long until they have their own government. But at the moment, best he can do is not to scuttle the IMF process, because if you walk back on the IMF commitments unilaterally, it will unleash a chain of events which will lead us back to where we started in 2022-23 when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was ousted. So that is a very important element that Mr. Dissanayake, the new president, perhaps he has already taken into consideration the fact that he can't do as what Gotabaya did. Because if you act without concern to the economy, just go by populist economic populism, will be doomed. So I think they have a good understanding of what are the challenges before them. So I expect them to, in the short term, they will act coherently. But once their own government is in power, if they ever have their own government, it may be rather problematic, because there you have a set of people who have very rather negative idea on the IMF and other IMF program. And also we have to understand despite Sri Lanka has been still in the woods, we have made a tremendous progress, because the inflation itself has been brought down to a lower single digit, and we had only 20 million usable foreign reserves when Gotabaya Rajapaksa left. Now we have 5.7 billion US dollar, and the economy has grown at 5% during the last half of this year. So these are tremendous, significant achievement that Mr. Dissanayake has to build on this, not to destroy it just because some of his party fellow travelers may not like it. But I think he will act with a great degree of sensibility at the moment. But once their own government come to power, probably we'll have a very hung parliament in the future. So we will know what will happen. But at the moment, I think there won't be major diversion from the current program, current path taken by the previous government. Because it has worked well at the moment.
Mr. Perera,
though there may be certain subsidies and other
Mr.
measures
Perera,
to alleviate.
Okay. I have paucity of time. I'll have to leave it here. But thank you very much to both of you, Mr. Jehan Perera and Dr. Ranga Jayasuriya, for joining us on Mirror Now and helping us get an understanding of your country's political situation. Thank you very much to both of you.